to welcome everybody to another round square table discussion. We'll have a discussion with our department to figure out how this happened at a different point in time. But really, we're here to facilitate meaningful and thoughtful conversations around the business of creativity. And we are joined by four esteemed colleagues of ours, professional colleagues of ours from different pockets of the industry, people who are involved in, I don't know how to put this bluntly, selling things. People who are involved in getting the money to make the magic. And I think we've had the opportunity to have discussions with directors who are responsible once the idea is sold through or once there's a project available. Hey, these are the ones who execute it and who kind of make the magic through the camera, through the equipment, through the lenses, all the things. But before that can even happen, we need to find the money. And it's not always about the money, but like, oftentimes it's about the money. So we're here to chat with producers from all corners of the industry about their own experiences selling through ideas, why ideas fly, why ideas die, and I guess kind of everything in between. Is that a fair job description for what you guys do, more or less? Why don't we start with everyone just kind of introducing themselves, a little bit about them and what their current role and experience looks like.
So my name is Sheldon Alexander. I work at Rogers Sportsnet as a associate producer on Toronto Raptors broadcasts, Canada basketball broadcasts. On the side, I also run a production company in which we do a bunch of different podcasts and getting into just the other side of the media space in terms of even TV and film and stuff like that too. So, yeah. Keep myself pretty busy and, doing the both sides of having your own sort of thing going and also, the conglomerate of Rogers is an interesting balance for sure, but it's fun. Keeps you busy.
My name is Nancy Rak-Swales. I used to run a production department at a large agency and now I'm a freelance producer and I've been doing this for a damn long time.
You got some scars then? You got some work
just a few.
Okay.
My name is Mitch, Cappe, and I'm a producer by trade, background in film and television. Right now I'm an in-house EP at an agency downtown, and I run my own shop on the side with my own clients, and it's all line producing and producing.
Cool. I'm Amanda Wood. I'm a creative director and founder of an ad agency called Merci. We are going on 5 years now of specializing in cannabis, so that's been an interesting road. But we kind of take on all manner of clients in like highly regulated industries. So my kind of specialty, I guess, is finding loopholes and ways to just like, get in there and exploit a creative opportunity when it feels like there isn't any.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Like a similar theme I'm hearing is like everyone's got a thing and then also like another thing. Like I feel like wearing a few different hats, is that the norm? Just seems to be kind of everyone's story these days, especially when you work in creative. You're never really just doing one thing. Is that kind of par for the course?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we were in the era of like having to be a multidisciplinarian, and then we went into the era of like, you got to be a specialist, and now we've kind of landed somewhere in between where like, you have to be really, really good at the thing that you do, but you also have to have like a really solid understanding of all the pieces that go into it so that you can be like an effective collaborator. So that's kind of how I see it.
Absolutely. I think too, like for financial necessities, a lot of us have had to wear a lot of hats. So I mean, I personally have been a producer and a wardrobe stylist and in the art department and, so on and so forth. So, I think that's just sort of the name of the game. And I also think that makes us better producers because it gives us the ability to understand the issues that other sort of positions deal with.
Yeah.
It's the perspective it offers too. Like I've seen a lot of producers who have just only produced their entire life and they're great and they're effective and they do things a certain way. And then there's another tangent of producers who have been around where they were a craft server, they were a grip, they were a set dresser, and they kind of dip into every single role within the, team on set. And it kind of gives you that added exposure and added perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess once you've done all the jobs in the factory, for instance, then you're better qualified to kind of be the main, the overseer in the corner office looking down, and because you've just worked your way
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I kind of like to think that we're all together making that shit.
You can better dominate later.
Okay, I'm just,
Nobody's had a corner office in years.
okay. Fair.
What
But,
is this corner office you speak
You
of?
see where I was going with that, like metaphorically.
Totally, yeah.
So, I think just before we dive into some of the more specific topics here, like I think there's always a lot of mystery about what goes on above the line and kind of what goes on below the line. Above the line, meaning kind of either agency, client, it's more of a call sheet metaphor, and below the line are the people who make the things. But what is it, if you had to pick one thing that people below the line, the people who make the things, should know about what goes on above the line, because oftentimes there's a real hard stop in terms of what's shared with someone who's actually working on a project, especially before it's been sold through.
Yeah.
And they're always wondering, like, what the heck is going on up there? And we're still waiting on an answer. They said it was coming 3 or 4 weeks ago. And so just help frame what your fires look like on a day-to-day basis for people who aren't really involved in the sales process.
Yeah, I have a perspective on that, which is that people below the line, the goals are like efficiency, doing a job, doing it well, making things make sense and run like a well-oiled machine. Whereas like, that's not always the case above the line. A lot of the motivation is not necessarily based in like rational thought. Like there's a lot that goes on that's for, individual career advancement for a particular client, for example, or pleasing the egos of someone else. Like I think there's a lot of politics that happen that like impact the production in sometimes very inconvenient ways, which makes it seem like, we're demanding and maybe I'm like painting an image that's not
Well,
true.
it's interesting because you're coming from the creative perspective, and I think a lot of the time too, to your point, there's a bit of ego satiation that sort of goes on too, but it's our job to bring these creative ideas to life. And that creative person may definitely have some things in mind that completely, totally clash with all of the efficiency and well-oiled machine and budgetary stuff. And so I think too, like, finding that balance is huge for the overall production.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally.
I think the biggest part is understanding your role in the whole thing and understanding that everyone's goals aren't the same as yours, right? And I think like that's the biggest thing to realize. Whereas, I'd like to think of myself as a creative through and through, and so having the understanding that someone above me is making a decision that has nothing to do with the creative, but also it's not an indictment on my creativity either. Right? And so you don't take it personally because that person's making a decision based off, as you were saying, their goals, right? Like whatever their perspective is, whatever their win is that they're trying to get, which might be different than mine, trying to just make something really creative and cool and dope or whatever, however you want to frame it. So I think like that's the biggest thing, understanding your role and that not everyone has the same goals as you.
It's an interesting parallel as well. Part of your question dipped into like what do the grouping on sets not see that goes on behind the scenes, and call it upstairs or above the line. And a lot of it, it's from like a logistical perspective, a practical perspective. Some of these decisions are made long beforehand from even a legal perspective of like, we have to shoot in a specific way to make a specific budget work. And I remember even firsthand being there on set sometimes where people are like, why aren't we shooting it this way instead? If we did this, it would be so much better. Or why are we inside in a studio? We could just shoot this outside. But there's all these decisions that happen long before we get there. And I think we could all, agree that like some of these decisions might not be sensible or sensical on set, but they're calculated, and to a degree, sure, it's political. I mean, it's always political, but they're also grounded in some sort of efficiency. Like we're winning a game at some point of the process, and that's a lot that's not seen necessarily on set.
What gets a brand or a client excited about the project to a point where everyone is pulling in the same direction? Because it sounds like there's many times when it's like everyone's pulling in different directions and the rock is not moving up the hill. But what is it about a project which gets people with a different perspective, maybe even different goals, maybe even different approaches on side, where it's like, hey, this thing needs to happen? Because no shortage of reasons why projects don't happen, but what gets it over the hump to say, hey, let's get there together?
So I'm going to answer that with like a little bit of an opposite. A while ago I had a client, and they were saying yes the entire time, but there was trepidation behind their yes. And I heard it, and my whole entire team heard it. And
like they weren't sure, they weren't confident in their decisions?
There was just something there. And the creative concept, they bought it initially, but every time there was a little bit of a question around the concept and how it would sort of translate through in the wild when it was out in market.
So they were saying yes?
Yes. But the agency, to our uncredit, we didn't listen. We didn't stop, and we didn't say, like, what's behind that question mark in the yes? And unfortunately, they spent a whole pile of money. The stuff didn't go to any market in any meaningful way. And when we sat down and we talked about it afterwards, it was that they were never really fully bought in anyway. So I think in order to get a client or a brand inspired, they have to be excited about what we're doing, and they also have to realize maybe what some of those intricacies are that we made those decisions on earlier that aren't making any sense now that we're shooting, in a studio and we could have easily shot this outside. I find if they're along for the ride and they understand these things, they're a little bit more empowered and they're a little more excited to get into the project, and we'll be a little bit more flexible.
So like communication, right? So like kind of explaining process as you go and filling in that void, filling in that blank.
Exactly.
I'm a big believer in that too. I'm totally with you on that. It's like sharing your excitement in it naturally in terms of your personality, but then also when you hear the client ask these questions, it's not just answering that question yes or no. It's like, hold on, why are you asking that question? Maybe it's a part of this process, the filmmaking or the commercial making process that they're not quite grasping. And I think a lot of the time on client side, it could be assumed that a shoot is the same as the last shoot because the script is similar, but on our side, it's totally different. It's like it's black and white. It's like complete opposite, and that process in tandem with that is different and manicured. And so our natural excitement, I find personally that it excites the client. Like if our personality is positive and unanimous across the board and we're all like gung-ho for this, positivity is contagious. And that often leads right down to the client and it gets them on board.
How often and I'll try to find the right words here, but when you talk about that positivity and just a generally gung-ho attitude about a project, where's the line between like, oh, like Mitch is a nice guy and is excited for the project, and Mitch is trying to sell me something. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm sure that's a fine line, and everyone's kind of got their guard up, to make sure that the best decisions are being made, right?
You know that scale of optimist, pessimist, realist. My personal belief in this is if you weigh yourself towards the realist side of things, then you will also be able to explain the negative in the whatever the cause and action is or the steps that you're taking, and also the positive, what's that takeaway and how can it benefit them? It's not just arbitrary positive, it's, or positivity, yeah.
Yeah, people know when you're BSing them, right? Like, as you were saying, well, I think it goes the other way too. Like, when you're being BS'd, right? So you sort of take that approach with it. And even in the example that you were talking about, you kind of sense the hesitation there, right? Like something was off. And so to your point, like just being real from the get-go kind of allows you to critique certain things along the way, be real about, hey, I'm not really sure about this, and have those honest conversations beforehand before you end up in a scenario where you've done all this stuff and then it's kind of like, this doesn't really work. Because I think one thing that I try to stay focused on is understanding what that client's goal is, right? Like, what is it that they want out of this project? What is the end goal? What are, the end targets that they're trying to hit specifically? And then in my creative flow, trying to then build on that. So now I'm highlighting the things that I know that they want to see in the end product. I think sometimes what happens is too much sell mode of just what my idea is, and my idea is just an idea, right? Like, it's not right, wrong, or indifferent. Someone else is making a decision on whether it's good or not. Do you know what I mean? And that person's not the be all and end all. It's just, well, they're in charge. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's understanding that balance of power, I think, will help a lot in just relaxing you and not being offended because someone didn't like this idea or concept or whatever
Such a
it is.
subjective industry, isn't it?
Oh my God, yeah.
It's just someone's opinion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like so many
Yeah.
things just come down to someone's opinion. And I think I say this now, like however many years in, but in the beginning it's tough, right? When you think like, hey, I had this really good idea and it's not really, like how did they not like this idea? And I remember very early on someone telling me, well, trust yourself to have more than one good idea in your life. And when you think of it from that perspective, it's like, oh yeah, cool, everything's fine, right? Like, all right, this person didn't like it, doesn't mean it's a bad idea. In fact, I'm sure you've all been in scenarios where you've kind of remixed something else before, like here's this concept, didn't work here, but now I'm gonna remix it and pitch it here, and then it ends up working, right? So yeah, it's just trusting yourself.
So when we talk about working and not working, let's say jobs kind of going through and not going through. Nancy, you spoke about the trepidation in a client's voice. You could tell something was afoot. And you've likely all encountered situations where your gut is telling you, hey, this project is a home run, slam dunk, and it was, and also like, oh, something is off here. What, for each of you, what are some telltale signs that, like a red flag that this project is not going to happen, and then adversely, what are some green flags that are like, oh yeah, like this has all the makings of a successful project? Start over here.
Yeah. In my experience, like it's almost always due to the client that a project doesn't move forward. So I'll speak to it just in terms of like the red flags that I've seen from clients.
Like a sales perspective.
Yeah, I think when there's not a strong sense of leadership on the client side, or like there's some ambiguity around like who has the final say, or who's totally bought in, to your point. Anytime there's like a lack of clarity around decision making, I think that's usually a red flag. Because then there's a lack of accountability, like that tends to devolve into, you know what, we're just gonna like pause on this project, or we're reallocating budget, or whatever the explanation is.
What's interesting, not to interrupt, but when that filters down, I'm as a producer who's sometimes pitching on those jobs per se, it's kind of like you are still as an agency responsible for vetting, crewing up options, triple bidding, which we'll talk about in a second. And it's almost kind of like you still need to move the idea forward, involving people whose time may not be well spent, but ultimately, as the agency, you still need to put in that legwork. You're not allowed to tell a client, call me when you're serious, right? Because that would likely... that would likely
it's not going to benefit
some relationships.
Exactly.
But how much work do you feel it's reasonable to do, even when you're seeing, the red lights flashing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have a really awesome producer who like builds in a lot of touch points and like moments where people can either say yay or nay. So I feel like we have those safeguards in place on our team, but I don't know, maybe come back to me on that one.
Okay.
It's always unfortunate when a project that everybody's sort of jumped in on and everybody's bought in on goes away. One thing that I've noticed is, as a red flag, it kind of goes to a little bit of what you were saying about the client buying in. From the financial perspective, it's we need to spend this money by the end of the year. This is all we have for this year. And we have to shoot, and we have to deliver, and we have to edit everything, all the spending in this year. And you're kind of like in that October, November territory. And it's not that the spending is arbitrary or the campaign is arbitrary. The creative might be incredible. But I find a lot of the time, budgets move around, and objectives and internal mandates move around, and that spending is a casualty of that a lot of the time, and it's completely out of our control. A lot of this is like completely client side, and it's at no fault to the creative or the intent, and we might have done so much work by this point, and perhaps the client has been on board that entire time, but it just comes straight from top down, and the project disappears. And look, it
So there's
happens.
no flag, it just kind of like,
Yeah.
sometimes it just poof.
Yeah, sometimes it's poof. Maybe you get a week or maybe 2 weeks notice of, hey, there might be a thing coming down the pipe where this project might. So you go into reactionary mode at that point, and you put everything on standby as much as you can, and you try to salvage from a financial perspective as much as you can without destroying any relationships, and also being ethical and fair and whatnot, and just kind of being more precautious or cautious, and staying ahead of it as much as you can in your reactionary sort of phase.
Yeah.
My
Looking forward to
biggest
this one.
red
Yeah.
flag, if the client won't give me a number. So are you
Yeah.
looking at 5 figures? Are you looking at 6 figures? What we do is really very, very interesting, and like, let's be real, it's kind of sexy. It does definitely have that appeal, but like, not a lot of people actually understand how much things cost. So cool, you want to make some content or you want to make a TV commercial. If you can't give me some sort of number, like even a range, I'm sort of feeling like you have absolutely no idea what it actually costs to film things, and that's probably going to go away.
Like, but are you like throwing numbers their way to get a reaction out of them? Or if it's truly like they can't come to you with something that feels at least moderately concrete or malleable?
Yeah, no,
or
we
something?
definitely have the conversation. Like if I, sitting with the client, like if I say $50,000 to you, what's going on in your stomach right now? But like that hypothetical conversation versus actually like, here's the bid. Those are two very, very different conversations. So for me, like I said, if there is not even an idea of a budgetary number, that's usually a huge red flag for me.
I think it's very much, I totally agree with that. I think a lot of it is being able to read people, and you can tell right away if someone knows what they're doing or not, right? Like how bought in they are on it. As you said, if you don't have an understanding how much something costs to shoot it, you have no idea about that. Okay, well, I know you're not really that serious, and so that's gonna alter how much I'm putting into this. Like, it's interesting, right? Like there was something we just did recently where there was talk about it being sold, but it was still a creative thing that we were going to do anyways. And so in the back of my mind, to further your point, Mitch, it was like being cautious where I'm not gonna go overboard, but there's things that I'm going to do that I know I can use anyways. And so, right when we finish completing the project, the client comes back now and they're in, and they also want us to shoot extra interviews. And I'm like, wait a second, like I shot these interviews because I was gonna do them anyways, but now out of the blue, after we've already done it, now you're coming back to say you also want this. Like you just had no idea what you were doing from the get-go, but luckily we were planning ahead and working on all these things of what it could potentially turn out to be. So again, going back to the original, I guess like one of the first things I said was just knowing what your role is and trying to be creative and put out the best product and worrying about what you can control. Because as you said, like once it comes down from the top, there's nothing you can do about it anyways. So getting mad about it or flipping out about it doesn't do anything, right? It's just kind of like you got to move on and,
I have
charge
another
it to the
red
game.
flag. You made me think of that when you were talking, is the I'll know it when I see it client. Where it's like,
That's kind of like
it's
your
kind
example
of like
too.
what you're saying. I don't know what I have, but if you give me a number, it's like put a few scenarios together.
Yeah.
That's like one of, and back to your question around like, then how do you know where to stop with like calling in favors and like, do I get this person to bid on this job, knowing that they're gonna put time and effort and like resources against it, and my client is in this like, I'll know it when I see it phase.
Yeah.
So like that's definitely a big red flag, I would say.
Can we build on that? Because I think you came up with such an eloquent label for clients like that, but can you think of different types of clients that you've run into, that you've all run into over time, where they kind of fall into specific categories of seriousness or not, or professionalism or not? I'm not going to
Like
find
the
the right
profiles?
adjectives. Profiles, like a customer profile. Like a customer profile.
What sign are you?
Are we talking about individual people or dynamic of brand, dynamic of client?
I mean, the more specific, the better, without sacrificing your own personal relationships.
No sacrificing is just one that comes to mind is if there's a lot of client turnover on that brand or that client, and there's a lot of different, there's people changing up, then that could pose as a red flag, and perhaps that's a profile.
Of a particular brand who just can't seem to retain their talent.
Yeah.
It could be for an assortment of reasons, though,
Sure.
not just that.
Well, I mean, my personal favorite is, I think it's probably the toughest one for account people to have to deal with, and Lord knows when the producer's in the room, it's not any easier, but the one who knows everything and knows better than you do, and okay, cool, we'll do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at a certain point you must be like, all right, I'm not getting paid enough for this. Yeah.
No, but at some point you're just like, okay, well, it's your money that I'm spending, so if you really want me to do it this way, it doesn't make necessarily a lot of sense, but it's your money, so I'll do it.
Can I share an interesting experience that I
Yeah.
had that relates directly to that? And, without naming names, we had a campaign, we had a commercial going to camera. It's about 3 days away from shooting. This is, 2018, 2017, so we're shooting on digital. This is not a film, type of film stock kind of shoot. And it was so close to the shooting date, and the client's like, we're changing, we're gonna be shooting this on film. We're gonna be shooting this on 35. And we're like, okay, interesting, all right. We could do that for you. I mean, always saying yes, but of course there's caveats. Why? And they couldn't answer why. They
Someone
just personally,
told them it was.
and so, but it goes to, it's like, oh, wait, you know how to produce too. It's like, let's do it. We were told that it would be just as expensive or just as cheap, or it's affordable, it's in scope. You don't really know what's in scope. It's like, it's that education that goes along with it too. It's like explaining it to the client and taking them along for the ride. But it's, oftentimes there are clients that tend to, know how to do it better than we do.
Yeah.
Not that we know how to do it best. I mean, we know how to do it, and we're learning every day, and we're obviously also making mistakes every day and learning from those mistakes, just like everybody else. But there are definitely some clients
But I
that
think
tend
that's
to
what
know
people
it.
are paying for. They're paying for the
Yes.
benefit of us
Yes.
having learned from our
Totally.
mistakes. The
Totally.
experience that comes out of that is invaluable.
Do you does your counterpart often, are there, do they have profiles, do they have technical profiles or maybe creative profiles, in the sense that when you're working with someone on the other end of a job, do they have a certain kind of skill set more often than not that you can pick up on, whereas how to vibe with them? Like if someone's very technical, are you anticipating a lot of conversations about
my God, yes.
film versus digital and such?
But that goes into the client communication, client relationship as well. It's like, I'm a little bit of a techie, I'm a little bit of a nerd, retro video games, right? And if I know the client is into that, we're gonna be talking RetroPie the entire time. And then we'll get into business, we'll figure it out, but that helps create that relationship and that trust and getting that green light when you really need it.
And that helps the things that will get you towards a green light, right? You
Totally.
understand that if someone's more of a tech person, well, I'm gonna spend more time explaining those angles of the project to them, right? Selling them on that side of it. So
Enrolling them in it.
Exactly.
making
Or
them
when you
part
make
of the
eye contact
process.
or virtual
Yeah,
eye
yeah.
contact these days, and you just know you are on the same
Yeah.
page. It's one of those dynamics, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room when it comes to pitching on commercials, at least from a producer or director standpoint, which is the dreaded triple bid. And I'd love to just hear I'd love to hear your perspectives on it, because it feels like a necessary evil, especially if you're like an AOR and that's just comes with the assignment with the brand. But does this help? Do triple bids, when the agency producers are trying to make nice with every director or production company, pretending like they're the only one and babe, I love you, and all this business, does that process ultimately lead to the best possible outcome? Or is it more taxing on resources than it should be if an agency can say, hey, I know the director or
The right
the lead
person,
for you,
yeah.
let's just make it happen? Why do clients need to see that second and third bid? I've thrown a lot at the wall there, so please,
A lot of it is regulatory.
unpeel, yeah.
I've done some work on, some financial institutions and stuff like that. It was all very, very regulatory. So it was necessary. The fact of the matter is that the creative team and the producer, between the two of them, usually know who they want on the job before we even start talking to anybody. But that's not a fair way to go. And I have seen the recommendation change from, day one producer creative team agree this is who we want to final product. I absolutely have seen it change, so it's not like set in stone, but usually we know who we want to work with. And the fact of the matter is that it does fall out of relationships. We all want to work with our friends. We all want to work with people that like we want to hang out with on a day-to-day. So when those relationships exist already, it does. It comes down to relationship, and it's the relationship that that creative team may have with that director, or I might have with that EP.
Does the client usually take the agency reco, or what percentage of the time?
They usually, sometimes if it's come down to money, they will push to get the lower bid if it wasn't the agency reco. We'll usually go to the reco and say, listen, not supposed to say that, but let's face it, we do.
Well, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like, it happens. Anything can happen. It's a crazy world.
It's so true.
Any on the side thoughts about that process?
Yeah, it really makes me think about like the spec work debate as well, like when to spend resources and when not to. I always, like the industry I work in and the size of my agency, like we don't often engage in big enough projects where like triple bidding is mandatory. We'll usually like get like 2 bids, like 2 different approaches, and kind of make the decision from there. But I do have, kind of a moral problem with asking people to do work when you know full well, or you at least have a good idea that they're not going to be the one that's selected for the job. And if that is the case, like I'll do what I can to help them understand that it might be a long shot, but like, give it your best. I'm just like you said earlier, being a realist. I'm not going to tell you, like, I never do the, hey baby, you're my number one. Like, I never do that because I hate letting people down. Like, the actual act of like I'd rather be rejected than do the rejecting. So I try to keep things like pretty, not vague, but realistic. I try to approach bidding with realism.
Are there any things that you've seen, any of you, in that bidding process which you think the outcome would be better, it would be more efficient, people would be less frustrated? Would there be anything about that bidding process which you would change, be it for the benefit of the ultimate client or the director or production company who's bidding on the work? I mean, those are 2 different perspectives, but is there anything that could be tweaked to just improve the overall experience?
I mean, it's a bit of a fantasy, but if there was like a more standardized bidding process across industries, maybe not just.
Well, the bidding process exists because of the sponsorship scandals, right? So, I mean, that's literally why it's there.
What do you mean?
Sorry,
Like when the governments were like giving agencies all kinds of money, like without anything, and they were just going off and spending it, and people were getting rich. So it really did fall out of the idea of being more fiscally responsible. Like,
And equitable.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is there for a reason. And I also think, like, and don't get me wrong, I hate doing it, and I don't like being dishonest with my vendor, but it's my job, and it's what I'm paid for, so it's what I have to do. And so, I think it is a benefit to the client because then we really understand how much something costs. Like the way that you do something might be different than the way that this guy does something, might be different than the way that this guy does something. And those things will all have different financial implications. So I think there's a learning in that too. Not to say that I like the process.
Yeah, that's a great point though, and sorry, I don't mean to cut, I know you guys haven't. But sometimes clients do need to understand how much things cost, and until you've been validated by 2 or 3 different voices to say the thing that you want to do is like way more expensive than you think it is, like you won't get to that place. So I can see why, bidding in that regard makes a lot of sense and can actually like lead to a better relationship with the client. It gives you that credibility.
Yeah.
Something that might better off that whole process, it's on the ethical and the moral front of asking a director or a production house to bid write a treatment, and the expectation, without naming names, but potentially, categorically positions, like the creative team, the client, accounts, they're putting time into that treatment, and while there might be resources at their affiliated production company, whoever they're represented by, to design it, to write it up, to assemble this document, it's extensive work. And it takes time. In some cases, it could take a day. In some cases, it could take a week or weeks. And so from the ethical front of suggesting that is something that will not be compensated and or commissioned, it sets apart, like it goes into that whole spec world, right? Not working for spec is something that if that were to change, unanimously across the globe, but especially in our landscape in Toronto or Ontario or Canada, it would go a long way. And so something that we've been trying to do, not just at the agency that I'm at, but also with my production company, whenever we work with a director or we're looking between directors, is you're compensated for that treatment, for that time. And if
where does that money come from?
That money, in a best case scenario, comes from the budget of the project. But I'm in an interesting dynamic. So where a lot of historically triple bidding, that is the standard. We're a single bid situation on my side, not just at the agency, but also at my production company. We might competitively, compare a director to another director of like, what's your vision for this? But they're working with the exact same budget. They're working with the exact same set of resources. And we're just curious, well, how are you going to shoot it? What's your technical approach? What's the separation between the other director? And that might warrant a treatment. We're going to pay you to do that, and that will come out of the resources of the project. And if the client is not in agreement to that, it'll come out of our budget. But the point is that it's not with the expectation that this vendor, this director, this person who is essentially working for free is not working for free. Right. I think unanimously, us as producers, as content creators, as creatives, as so on and so on, we're not in the business of working for free, nor are they. And so I think on the ethical front, that it goes to all crew as well. I think the expectation is that we're all paid fairly and ethically, and it starts there.
And so I guess there would be some type of expectation of quality of treatment, right? Like I guess the directors, let's say you're reaching out to 3 directors, you would reach out to them knowing that, hey, they're all getting paid for their treatment, and so you would likely only reach out to ones who would be able to meet your expectations? Well,
that conversation starts long before we even get the creative. We have our relationships, and it might be with other production houses or freelance directors, but that roster, that Rolodex, I think it's up to us to make sure that they are aware that, hey, if we end up working together ever, it doesn't matter what the project is, this is the standard that we follow, and it's something that you could count on. So that conversation is already set in stone by the time you even pick up the phone.
Is that, I'd never even considered that. Sounds, especially a reasonable fee. Like if you're paying a director even, $750 to $1,500, and I have no idea what the structure looks like, but just say, hey, you might not be being compensated at your standard rate, but you will be compensated for your time, even if you're only contributing an idea which helps a client move towards the one that they like. You're still part of the decision-making process.
Totally.
Is that something from an agency perspective that you can see, Nancy, that you can see an agency actually buying into, to budget out X, let's say 3 directors, $4,500, $1,500, or I should say, you only pay the losing directors because the winning director will get the job. If you said, hey, we're putting $3,000 out to compensate the prodcos and directors for their work, is that possible?
I completely think it's possible. I completely think it's reasonable. Just where we are right now economically, getting any extra cents out of anybody right now is a real huge challenge. And just to be like, oh, hey, so by the way, here's this extra couple of grand that we didn't talk about. I think that's the challenging conversation right now. I think it's the right thing to do.
And with the amount of money in advertising, it's a rounding error in the grand scheme of things.
It should be.
Yeah.
It really is, but it's not the dollar amount, it's the gesture. It's the fact that, hey, you're going to be working your butt off for me. The least I could do is give you, put a few shekels in your pocket. And if it's priced appropriately, that's even better. That's amazing. But it's the gesture that counts the most. It's the understanding that, hey, we're in this together. Like we're both fighting for the same team, and there's no expectation that you're just going to slave away and do something for free, because that's just what everybody else is doing, and that's the expectation of, say, the agency or the client, and so on and so forth. The other conversation to have is, well, what's ethically appropriate here? Sometimes, hey, if it comes out of my rate, sure, whatever makes this happen. It goes back to the gesture. Yeah.
What are some things across the board, assuming you've all kind of looked at a treatment or a bid at some point, or someone's presented an idea to you, what's something that you've seen that stands out? And obviously there's probably lots of little nooks and crannies on jobs to build on the creative in a meaningful way to get a client or an agency's attention. But is there anything from submissions, bids, quotes that you've seen that you might be able to share that is not a silver bullet for everybody, but that, hey, this particular producer or director did this thing and I didn't forget it, or maybe they got the job because they did this, and that really connected with the client or the decision maker?
So I have a different viewpoint from like this conversation, just because it's like I'm probably below the line, using your term from earlier, in terms of, working for a bigger company. There'll be a salesperson that will send out an email, hey, we're trying to get this client for blank. They're thinking something like blank. What do you think?
And you're working on the
I'm
idea.
working on the idea, yeah. So they'll send that to me, and the reason I wanted to bring this up is just because I feel like, coming at it from a completely different perspective, what really helps me is that salesperson is coming to me in honesty. I can tell how far along they are in the process, or, how much I should put into sending them the ideas. Like, is this just like the early brainstorming session where you just want like a bunch of different ideas that you can go back to them to maybe then get into a deeper conversation? Are you like at the finish line in terms of, no, this is what they want to do, can you like hammer this home, or like elevate it to make it a little bit better? And I think like that relationship is so important, because I've had, different salespeople that you work with that will message you, and it is kind of a free for all. And then you put in a bunch of time into something, and then you like never hear anything back. And it's such a big company.
Right into the void.
Yeah, and it's such a big company where like, oh yeah, this person messaged me, but I haven't seen them in a while. Whereas the flip side of that is, and I'm saying this, like the people that I've been working with lately, it's a scenario where we've built a relationship. So like sometimes it's just like, hey, Shell, how's it going? And small talk, and then it's not even about something they're working on. So then the next week, when it is something that they're trying to push through, I know, okay, he's close. Let me try to, here's like 4 good things. I think if you change this to this, it can really work. Or going back to something we were talking about earlier, they might be trying to pitch something that we wouldn't really execute, let's say in the middle of a basketball game, right? It's like, oh, we can't really do that. That doesn't make sense. But they don't know that. So that's when we'll come in and help them and be like, well, what if you did it this way instead? That might work better because, during a stoppage of play in a free throw, it'll work better to get the live read in. You know what I mean? And help them along in that process. So I think that relationship from the top down, and what you were talking about, like that's a relationship being built, right? Like you making the grand gesture that it's not just, oh, I'm poaching this person for their ideas and concepts and then running off to, go do it with someone else, or like sell it and then never really trickle back down to the people that will have to execute it until it's time for me to find out that I got to do this. The relationship side of it I think is so important. So I just wanted to say that just because it's like, I know I'm coming at it from a different viewpoint.
But it's interesting because it's all in the same organization. You guys are all the big team trying to pull in the advertisers, I guess, and then that becomes. So is there also politics there?
Definitely, I think there is, but it's more so from the viewpoint of the salespeople. Lately, what's changed a lot, I've found, is that they have an understanding that if we tap into the people who actually have to execute it, who might know more about, the technicality of a broadcast, or even sometimes in certain instances the sport that we're working on, it will only help them do their job better, right? So, bringing someone in on the early stages of your pitch process, to have someone say, well, actually, I'll use an example, like I think it was like a delivery company, like Uber Eats or whatever, right? They were trying to pitch something, and it's like, hey, we want to do fast delivery. And it's like, okay, shot clock, like here's 24-second shot clock in the sport, here's your fastest take. Like just having an understanding of how the sport works and all the little intricacies that I can throw back at them. And they're like, yep, we can take that works. It still comes down to communication. If I don't have a relationship with this salesperson, then it's just like I'm getting another email at the end of my day that I'm like, I gotta do this too. Okay, sure. And you're trying to come up with something, but I'm gonna be more motivated if I have a relationship with Mitch, and Mitch has been like, we have conversations, and now I'm like, all right, yeah, I got you, no problem. Let me send you something tomorrow morning. I'll send you like 5 things. That part of it is really big.
But I think that's actually like, I do think that our relationships are everything. You asked what's something that somebody did. So I worked on a production, it was early on in COVID, and somebody on the crew thought that they like had some symptoms. And again,
Oh, like sickness?
Yeah. But we were like, we were on day 2.
The horse is out of the barn.
Exactly. So we were, she pulled me aside, and it was me and her, and we were the only 2 people that knew what happened. And she was dealing directly with, what was the name of the company that was doing all of our testing back in the day? Strata. Okay. She was dealing directly with Strata and like calling them like on the hour. She took a rapid test and it came back negative, but we were waiting for, the other one. And she and I were on the phone, like, have you heard from them yet? Like every hour on the hour. And it was just the 2 of us. We fought a battle. We were both like, oh my God, if that person has COVID and we've spread it to the entire crew, we were so shit, it's not even funny. But we got through it together, and I would literally call her for anything.
But you know what? On that note too, shooting in COVID was a real strength test of our relationships. I remember shooting something even for a government agency relating directly to, without saying what it is, relating directly to COVID. And the director that we had on board was so collaborative and so understanding that they were able to roll with the punches, and there were a lot of punches. In fact, I think we shot in this studio. And needless to say, it goes back to one of your other questions too. That campaign was canceled thereafter. But before the client canceled the production, we shot it, and there were COVID scares, and we had to go through that and test our relationships, and everybody came to the table and gave it their all, and we were able to succeed for the shoot, that is, because of the strength of those relationships, and kind of conquer.
I can speak maybe more from like a creative perspective, because let's be honest, I'm never really looking at the numbers when I'm like evaluating a bid, but I think like some times where I've been really impressed by like a director's treatment is when they'll do exactly the thing that you're asking, but then they'll maybe include like a note or like, I had this idea, and offer you something that you'd never thought of before. And it's not even necessarily that, oh, like that's what I'm gonna go with, like that was such a great suggestion. It's showing a willingness to like throw some ideas out there, be collaborative, having an openness. Like for me, that as like being a creative director and selecting the person that you want to work with for, a long stretch of time, a lot of that comes down to relationships and like knowing that you're going to be 2 people who are vibing and jamming, and the thing that you're creating is not just like we're not just manufacturing a product, but we're like engaging in art together. So that's something that I look for when evaluating bids, for sure.
When we've circled around kind of budgets, and especially in are we in a recession? Is a recession coming? I don't know. It feels like if we're not in a recession, I don't know what a recession is. But money becomes top of mind, and ideas go or they don't because money exists or it doesn't. And so, what type of insights could you provide to individuals, production companies, directors, people who you're bidding out work to, about how budgets are assigned? Because I think to your point, if someone's bidding on something, they want to do what you're asking them out of cherry on top, but that cherry might cost $8,000, right?
Sure.
And it's not to say that you have to take it or not, but we always want to make sure that our ideas fit cleanly into whatever strategic plan is on the table. And so what can you tell us about how much a commercial should cost, or how clients decide if it's $100,000 or if it's $20,000 or if it's $250,000? What type of insights are you providing to them? What type of candid discussions are you having with clients that help them establish what's this campaign worth to me? Because when it comes down to bids, it can be a bit of a range. It can be a little bit wishy-washy. But what type of flexibility are you discussing with the clients, and how might that trickle down to people who might want to be bidding with similar flexibility and budget ranges?
We like to show clients, especially for the ones who maybe don't necessarily have an understanding of how much they want to spend or how much things cost. We'll show them some samples and say, this costs $10,000 to do, tabletop shoot, something really quick, versus like this costs $250,000, to kind of orient them in a direction. And then hopefully that helps them then decide, like, okay, I want the fancy thing, so I'm going to allocate, or at least do my best to allocate budget or pull money from elsewhere. But I guess that goes back to the I know it when I see it client. But giving them a well-rounded understanding of the costs of things is such a great way for, as an agency, like our job, educating the client, but then also if you're bidding, sometimes you need to provide that education as well.
Something that goes alongside the educational aspect is the creative itself. If it's scalable, that's a major indicator of where this budget is going to fall. And so what's the minimum viable product, and where can we go from that? And so if the client has budgetary restrictions and this creative is calling for Michael Bay explosions, okay, well, your money does get you some of that, get you here. Well, that's minimum viable product, but it's scalable. So if you add more money in, boom, it goes up to this tier, this tier, this tier, to call it a tier. That communication is monstrumental in ensuring that project's success, but also making sure that clarity is there of, well, what does this money get you? What can this budget be? And how big can it possibly grow?
Yeah.
Any thoughts about money over here?
I would I would agree with that. And, it's the idea of like, okay, here's what you asked for, and here's the dollar value that goes around with it, but here's this really cool freaking thing that we can do. It is going to cost you this much more, but here's how it will improve your overall product. And it's that communication, that education.
Yeah, I think it's just being upfront about and giving options, right? Like trying to hit different price points and say, we can do this. Like all of them will be really good. All of them will be, to standard, and but being honest about the price points, like this is what we can do for this. I think that's the best way to kind of go about it, with the honesty, obviously, because at the end of the day, without that, there's nothing, right? So,
yeah. Were you, out of curiosity, the one who brokered the Bargnani Primo Pasta partnership, or?
That's well before.
Right,
that's well before my time.
Let me.
That's a good one.
I'm just gonna put a statement on the table and take it for what it means to you. Just like to hear your thoughts on it. And in this current climate, today, in this day and age of production creative, good enough is good enough. You agree or disagree?
I don't know. I find this general apathy has settled over society that statement just sort of like bleeds. It bleeds apathy. I don't think good enough is good enough. I think we're all incredibly overstimulated. I think there's a lot of information coming at us, and if what you're putting out doesn't cut through, then what's the point?
But Mitch earlier talked about the, October to December, spend the money to spend the money, or else we don't get that money. And all of a sudden, I'm not saying that wouldn't be a good project, but there's competing.
But is that good enough to good enough? It's good enough is good enough. Like at the end of the day, that creative, if it does go and it is not canceled thereafter, it's going to come out. And I don't think you're putting the seal on it, whether it's the creative director, the ECD, the CCO, the client, letting it out of the gate until it's at a point of optimum quality. So I don't know if that speaks completely to it, but I can understand how it can relate. Like, it's kind of like writing a book. It's like, how many revisions are you going to come out before it's 100% perfect? At some point, you do have to put, seal it and send it in, And so you can work on it within the purview of the schedule flexibility and whatnot and the resources of the project. But does that mean that good enough is good enough? Not necessarily. It could be amazing. It could be optimum quality by the time that process is done.
Yeah, I think that's the label of it, right? Because like, you could be restrained by a whole different assortment of factors that, okay, I only had 2 weeks, or I only had this budget, or I only had whatever. But I think the bigger thing overall is you're in your position for a reason. And with that comes a level of quality and talent that you've earned to get there. And so even my good enough is still really good. Do you know what I mean? And you're not saying that to sound like, cocky or anything like that. It's just the reality of the situation. You're not in the position you are because you do average or bad work, right? Like, you wouldn't be in your successful position for that. So there are times where, we'll label it as good enough is good enough, but it's like, hey, I don't know, I'll use a recent example. I was at the office at 2 a.m. in the morning because the game was at 4:45 in Indonesia. I'm really tired right now. I can't see. Right? Like, so it's like, yeah, I still think this is really good, but like, as you said, you can sit there and re-edit and change a shot and, try to like find something else. Like, you can keep making revisions over and over and over again, but at a certain point you do have to stop and just be like, nope, this is good. Like, I gotta stop looking at this. It's as good as I'm going to make this. And I think it's just the way that we label it and frame it as to like, making it a negative, good enough, is it good enough? But like, no, that is good because you are good at your job. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it's a very
That makes
spirited
sense.
and supportive way of answering the question, especially when everyone's kind of feeling overworked and strained. Like, it just feels like nothing's really coming easy by doing the bare minimum these days.
Well, the reality of that scenario is, how long are you gonna be able to get by with doing the bare minimum anyways, right? So you're only doing a disservice to yourself, right? So like, that, okay, I think we were kind of touching on it earlier, right? It's like, you might know that, okay, I didn't crush this project, right? Like, when you put out your like best work, like, this is on my reel, this is whatever. When something's at that level, but you also know the reality of the situation is you can't do that every single time. Like, that's just not realistic. That's not possible. So as long as you have that understanding and that your baseline is still really good, like, you still tried, you're not mailing it in, for lack of a better term, you should be okay.
There's also some mechanisms within our control as producers that, if we tackle it early on enough, we can help mitigate the risk of that effect. So like, a good example would be, I think we've all been in situations where we're on set and it's like a brutal day. Like, I think my longest day on set was 25 hours. At that point,
Oh my God.
when you're on set, not a commercial, just FYI, but still, like, you're on set for that long and the OT is rising through the roof. Is it not just cheaper to send everybody home, get a day 2, come back tomorrow with everybody fresh, and continue on? Or do we just push and just push through that night and just get the shot, get the content done? What's the quality of work going to be at the end of the day? And you could sort of come up with those practices, that strategy early on, if we're forward thinking enough as a team, and we could sort of predict the fact, oh, this is going to be like a huge shoot, and so those decisions could help mitigate that. But it does go back to what you were saying. It's like, no, we're in our positions for a specific reason, and we're hiring the people we hire for a specific reason, and it's not just minimum viable product.
Yeah.
It will get us there, but it's not the like in high school, university. It's passing line is 50%. No,
Yeah.
passing line is like 95.
Yeah.
Anything below that is potentially a failure.
Yeah.
So where is that?
Because it is your
failure line?
name on it at the end of the day,
Well, it's
right?
not just your name too, but I mean, we're working with brands and stuff like that too. Brands have to be careful with what they slap their names on, as well as us. So,
There's a lot of people that are implicated.
For sure.
I agree with you, Sheldon, around like it's contextual, right? And I think if you're asking yourself, is this the best I can do with what I have available to me? And the answer is yes, it is good. Then like it is good.
Yeah.
But it can't be said with apathy. It can't be like, oh, good enough. It has to be like good enough. You know?
Yeah.
It's tonal.
Yeah, and worrying about what you can control, right? Because there's going to be certain
Exactly.
things that you just can't, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of an experience that I had and just welcome your perspectives. There was agency creative, which was kind of more or less baked, but it always requires a cherry on top. They always want to, hey, what are you bringing to the table, whatever. So really attacked the opportunity by identifying all the moments and the beats, like just the creatively, even from a framing standpoint, moments in the script, what's going to really make this dance. Been on the project with a really aggressive budget. Felt really good about it. I felt like I was good at it. What I did was not just good enough, like I really wanted the job, and I didn't get it. And then when I saw it hit the airwaves, it was just kind of like wide shot, wide shot, wide shot, and I don't know whether it was because I didn't ask enough questions about what was important to the project, but when you receive creative, you're like, well, it's my job to explore it, find, even if small little beats and close-ups and whatever, that is what gives story shape, finding those moments and beats. But then when it came back and it was just kind of like, might as well have been a guy going like this, you know what I mean, for 30 seconds, and that was one of the moments where I thought to myself, well, in this situation, at least for the client, in terms of like winning the job, good enough would have been good enough. And perhaps it was budget, right? Perhaps doing it my way just had too many cost implications, maybe too many departments. And they were like, hey, let's do this for a third of the price and sacrifice some production value. And so I think as a maker, if I'll call myself that in this particular example, it's hard to know when you're supposed to give your client your best look without providing scalable ideas, because doing this, it was not my MVP, right? And so it's like how to kind of suss out from a good enough perspective where you should begin your journey exploring creative, so that you're not pricing yourself out of an opportunity or just disqualifying yourself.
But do you also want the job that's good enough?
Well, I didn't know I didn't want the job until I saw the finished product. But there was a moment in time where I did, and so I think I have seen lots of jobs that I've been on, and some like really small scale B2B corporate stuff where it's like they literally, this is all that's necessary. And I think as we can kind of trickle this into the economic, downturn or whatever that we're in, it's like it feels like you need to be flexible above the line, below the line, because if you want to be working, you got to get the job done, and not everything's going to be for the real. Sometimes it's for the meal, And so
I like that. I'm stealing that. I'm stealing that one. I like that one.
it's about
Yeah, for sure.
Again, I'm sure there's lots of dialogue and flexibility and conversation, but
I also
it is
think
a tricky.
there's a lot
it's
of
tricky.
factors as well. Like, I mean, if you're telling me that a client came and wanted a $50,000 piece of content for $5,000, then we look at that a little bit differently, right? Than, well, just whatever, hack, here you go. I don't know.
It's also,
I think it's circumstantial. Like, and I also think too that there are things that require more craft than others.
Yeah. Maybe your like Cronenberg treatment of the corporate video was, they're like,
It was a
this
brand.
guy.
It was a brand. Yeah, point taken. Point taken. Point taken.
Yeah, I think you have to like temper your own creativity sometimes, and I hate myself for saying this, but there are times when it's like you're only going to frustrate a client by coming back with something that's over the top, and they're going to say either you weren't listening, or you clearly have not like taken the time to understand what this project is, or understand the constraints of the project. So yes, like there are times where you want to like go above and beyond to win the project, but sometimes that actually can be totally detrimental.
In that circumstance, I'm curious if there was the request. I mean, it's such a simple thing. I think we all do it with our clients, but can you provide me an example of what you're looking to receive? Anything you might have influenced your decision, not you, but the client, influenced your decision making online, something on YouTube, something already created that pairs well with your vision. And I find that step, not just from client, but also from creative directors as well, goes such a long way, because then you could have sussed it out potentially. Perhaps you did. Perhaps they did send something, but
It's agency, and in my experience, always rush. No offense. You know what I mean?
None taken.
you're not wrong.
Yeah, and so there's this sense of I want to be able to help meet an opportunity with a similar sense of urgency, but in doing so, when in the moment, agency or account executive might be like, just give me an idea of what it is, and don't put too much time into it because it's not they'll give you all that lingo, but at the same time it's like all these things make sense in hindsight, but in the moment when everything's rush and prospective clients are making you feel like you need to meet them where they are, that can have you overlook sometimes some of the most important questions to ask, even saying, no, I'm not bidding on this without a reference video, right? Like something like that makes total sense, but you're kind of taking a prospective client at their word about what's important and what's not. And then when the dust settles, everything that was always important, of course, was important in this particular situation, but you let urgency get the best of your experience.
Well, I mean, I think that's sort of like the function of it's sad to say, but like working in an agency, it is like pants on fire, go, go, go all the time. You were sort of mentioning that. I was thinking about a project that I was working on a couple of months ago, and it was an AI project. And I triple bid it, and all 3 vendors came back to me a week late. And I was fine with it because it was AI. It's still a very, very dicey world. Nobody really knows what they're doing. And like the acceptance from not just the internal team, but the clients, like, no, we're still thinking about this. Like, this is actually quite big. Give us the time that it actually takes to investigate this properly. So, I mean, maybe there's something in there.
Somebody I work with, also a mentor of mine, does something quite frequently, and I recognize it doesn't apply to every situation, but it just breathe. Just pause for a second. It's like, okay, so all this pressure is coming through that pipeline, that workflow of like, go, 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 we need this, but hold on, just breathe. And that might just be for your own, I guess, management of understanding what's at hand. It could also be for the team dynamic, the greater team dynamic, the dynamic with client being like, okay, totally recognize that there's an urgency here. Have some fundamental questions to ask. Can we just have one quick session? Even if it's a 15-minute brainstorm or a 15-minute Q&A, it will go lengths. And it's like that pause and just slow build of momentum rather than fast build of momentum goes miles. It goes so far. Yeah.
Sheldon, does that track? Does this taste differently in your world?
The one thing that's interesting that I find a lot is that the flip side of, sometimes you get the email that you missed and then it's a text message and then it's a phone call and it's like, oh, and then I'll call them back and it's not that important at all. But they're in their panic mode of, no, I need this right now, like whatever the last idea is. And so sometimes what I'll do is, and I'm tiptoeing around how I say this, but like I'll know the idea that you're going to want, but I know that you need a bunch of things to pitch, or you want to think that I'm going to send you more ideas that I know you're not going to take, but I'm sending you my best idea that I know you will take because I understand what's needed. Does that make sense? So then when I send that list back, everything's fine. And then it's slow down, everything's back to normal, everything's back on track. But it's just understanding the process that they're rushing because that's what they need. And I try to always be sort of calm and cool, and it's
You're
okay.
pretty calm and cool.
Yeah, it's just like, it's all right. Like everything's okay. Like we can figure that out. We can get that done. Cool. How about this, And I think that part of it is, I like that, the pause, because it's definitely definitely I catch myself in that a lot, where it's just like, okay, let me sit back, see what's actually needed here, and then, you know.
I want to throw, as we kind of slowly hit the finish line here on this discussion, I think this has been like a super insightful, informative, candid, and fun discussion. But I think there's, for at least my friends who work in advertising, and I'm gonna try to choose my words carefully. Everyone is stressed out. Everyone, minimum 50% of people are unhappy as a result of the amount of pressure and responsibility that is put on them on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis. Some friends candidly tell me, I'm literally just doing it for the money. Because agencies will pay you well enough to withstand a lot of the challenges and stressful scenarios that they put you in. And so my question is that, like, why does that happen? And I'm not to do a deep dive, but what is it about the way that the current advertising model works that is leading to such burnout? Is it the responsibility of leaders at organizations to push back? Because, frankly, I don't think the CEOs often care. CEOs are trying to make the sale, they pass it down the food chain, now it's someone else's problem, and they can almost kind of like wash their hands of it. And so there's this perpetual carrot dangle chasing money, and then eyes get wide and everyone's, I want the money, I want the money, I want the money. And it starts to have at least from candid conversations I've had with friends in advertising, it starts to really lead to well-being challenges, and no amount of spa day gift certificates or pizza lunches solve that problem. And so personally, as someone who doesn't work in advertising, I'm just trying to speak from conversations I've had, but is that a problem, and what do modern day advertising leaders need to know about building effective teams that are, the word I'm looking for is like strong teams that, my vocabulary is failing me right now, but not resistant, but
Resilient.
Thank you, teams. Thank you. What do leaders need to know about that? Because ultimately, it's just, I hate hearing that it leads to unhappiness. But I kind of feel like that's the expectation. But please correct me if I'm wrong and redirect my thinking.
I had a conversation with a woman recently who was like a VP at a global consulting firm, and she told me a story about their summer interns and how at the end of the term, they were trying to give someone a job, and all of the interns that they had hired in her department didn't want it. And it forced them to, people were literally saying, like, there's no amount of money you can give me to put myself through this. I think, like, the generation who are graduating now and entering the workforce have a completely different idea of what work should be, and that it's not about the employee serving the employer. It's about, like, how are you going to make my life enriched? What can you offer me that is beyond money? So I think, like, if you as an agency head can start to look at what you're building as a place to be a part of, and like, what's your vision, what are your values, you're going to go a lot further in terms of, like, not only attracting the right kind of talent, but getting the kind of people who their vision is aligned with yours. And that's going to lead to longevity and probably a stronger team, I can only imagine. I think.
That's interesting.
They'll feel more invested.
That's interesting. So yeah, like, not having the experience on, like, the advertising side, I'll try to relate it back to the, like, creative side. But to me, I think if I was speaking to someone running a company, I think it's like, you need to create a space to let your creative people be creative, and, like, listen to them, like, what do they need to be quote unquote happy on a daily basis, right? Because if you're feeling stressed out having to, come up with these creative ideas, like, you're not gonna get the best work. you can't have creative people worrying about the business side, if that makes sense, right? Like you have the business people to worry about the business, and you have the creative people to worry about the creative. And yeah, there's going to be some crossover where discussions need to be had, and decisions need to be made, and we all should understand that as adults. But at the same time, like there's too much crossover, I feel like, between those two things in a lot of industries. What does that
look like, though? Because we can talk about it philosophically all we want, but when it comes to letting creative people be creative, is it, do you want an iPad with a stylus in the break room? I say that tongue in cheek, but it's a real question. Like, what is the thing that, is it more time off, or is it a physical tool or a set of tools or set of resources that would
I think it's more, it's going to be different depending on like the, side of the business that you're on creatively. But I think that automatically it's just the understanding your workforce, right? And like, as you mentioned, like what I would do in that scenario is I would have exit interviews with all these interns and listen to them and ask them questions like, what was wrong, right? And like, you're not gonna take what they're saying as gospel and like change everything based on these opinions, but you're gonna listen to your employees. And it might be a scenario where your actual employees that are already there might be afraid to actually say something, right? Because they're stuck in their place, in their job, in their position. But like these people who are passing through are able to, be real about what the work environment actually is. And I think that, it's tougher as you get to a bigger corporation to maintain an environment that is fun and, warm and good, to be very just basic and bland. But like, that has to be the goal, right? It can't be, once you have the creative people worrying about like the corporate side of things and the business side of things, like you're just not gonna do well. Like people go into creative industries to be creative, right? Like they don't want to deal with numbers. They don't want to do that stuff. So like, let them do that, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Go for it.
Okay. I think the entire agency model is broken.
Okay, well, tell us.
No, if you think about it, we're very much operating in the exact same way that John Hamm and all his Mad Men did. It's 2023, and that took place in the 60s. So our society's changed, our ideals have changed, what we value has changed, the agency has to change. Clients aren't willing to pay the money that they used to, even when I started in this career, for the ideas that they had. So we've, as a society, stopped valuing ideas and craft and creative. So I think it's a really, really big problem that our little square round table may not be capable of solving.
But you're right about that, right? Like the value in an actual like good idea is not the same that it was, right? And like there's so many reasons for that, but even going back to a prior conversation where like what you said, the thing that stands out to me the most is still what you said earlier about like, hey, I'm gonna pay you for your work and your idea on this, even if it doesn't end up being the final product. Like that mindset, like I'm like, whoa, someone thinks like I'm stunned to hear that because it's so foreign to what we're used to in this model where basically I feel like you have a lot of entities that are trying to just get the most for the least at all costs, at all turns. And that's kind of the biggest problem, right? Because eventually people will burn out because of that, right? Like you're only going to push people so far before they realize, hey, I can figure out another way to do this.
I feel like you could help avoid burnout in a whole bunch of different ways. I don't think it's like one specific way. I think everybody at this table has mentioned something that I've been like sort of percolating in my head, and I think it kind of comes down to, I think you mentioned it first, it's like it doesn't matter how many pizza parties you have. If the appreciation for your staff isn't there in a non-pizza giving way, it's going to run its course pretty quickly. There's some agencies out there, of course, award season is award season, and when these press releases come out and you see only 2, maybe 3, 4, but the same 4 people being thanked continuously on every single post, it's great. Like I don't think any of us are expecting credit, nor are the crew that we're working with and the vendors in that sense. But there are then the other agencies that do thank people, and they thank people publicly, and they thank people and recognize people internally. And it's not just, okay, everybody, round of applause for this at a town hall, you know, whatever. It's consistently in office, out of office. It's also being flexible. It's like adapting to graduates that are now entering the workforce. What are their expectations? Not that it's not financially feasible. I've seen multiple agencies take this work for home model to heart. Really, like the office is here, come in if you would like. And of course, if there's a client meeting, we please use it.
Come in, yeah.
However, there's no expectation. We understand you're all working from afar, and it's like that understanding and that recognition in tandem really helps create a team dynamic beyond a pizza party, beyond bowling night, beyond a company barbecue, which all those things should happen anyways, for sure. Like, don't stop them. But I think it's that recognition from above, knowing that it's not just one person making decisions here. I mean, even if that is legitimately what's going on, it's knowing that you're a part of a team, and like personality, it goes back to that, and positivity is everything. It's all sort of part of that same pie.
Yeah,
You know?
people know when they're valued, right? And people know when they're not.
Interesting that the thing that you all seem to agree on is the most valuable is the least expensive, which is gratitude and appreciation and just
Totally.
and thank yous. So I think that's a really interesting way to end the conversation here. Put a cherry on top, as it were. And before we wrap up, just a quick rapid fire. What are you watching? What did you watch or stream recently? Movie, film, TV, whatever, that you were most excited
I
about?
have been watching Physical with Rose Byrne on Apple TV, and it has been like a joy, and it's been a real roller coaster. Dark moments, funny moments. It's a really, really good show. I've never seen anything like it.
Okay.
My wife and I are obsessed with The Last of Us, to the point where we now have the video games, we're working through them. It's like The Last of Us is just incredible. Highly recommend.
Do you have like the merch too and all the?
No merch yet. Okay. I have the Office merch. Okay. That's the other one.
I just finished watching the After Party season 2 on Apple TV. I loved the first one. I loved the second one. The concept is so fun, and I just need light right now. Aces.
I think I'm loving right now HBO's show on the Showtime Lakers, Winning Time. It's just based on a book, which is obviously like, I love the argument that's going on in media because they've taken a book that's obviously real and sourced and all that, but they've created a TV show that's obviously a bit of a parody in a sense. Like they go over the top with a lot of these characters who are real people, like it says it's Magic Johnson, but they go kind of over the top with a lot of the storylines. And people are having these like infighting because, you know, the real Jerry West comes out and says, that's not really me. And he's like throwing tables and chairs and being all angry. But it's like, it's a TV show and they're making entertainment and they got to put the thing up at the beginning. This is a TV show. We're not depicting it. You know what I mean? And so I like that side of it because it's just showing creativity to round this back up. Didn't even mean to do that, but yeah.
I'll throw a couple more on the pile. I can't say that they're not riveting, but one thing that I just enjoyed from just like a Hollywood popcorn perspective is Hijack.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So good.
I mean, for all the plain hijacking movies we've seen, this one, it felt fresh enough. And Idris Elba, actually, I now see why they want him to be Bond, to be honest, because he's like suave as all hell. Yeah. Like he is awesome.
He would kill it.
Totally. Yeah. And he just
Smooth.
It's like the camera is just like it
Loves him.
and he's like jacked too. Yes, like this guy's
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's on my list.
It's worth watching.
It's only what,
What's it on?
7
Yeah,
episodes.
it's so
short.
Yeah,
It's short.
You can finish it in one night, literally.
What's it on? Where am I going?
Apple TV.
Oh, it's on Apple. Good.
And then the other thing, which is like, I just need to know how it ends, is Blacklist. Me and my wife have been invested in this for, it's like on season 9 at this point, and it's like, it's almost offensive the way I've been shifting the storylines, but I'm so deep in the game now that I just need to know how it ends.
Yeah, gotta see it through.
It's just watchable, but
Yeah.
it's not, I wouldn't cancel plans to watch it, but anyways, that's mine. Anyways, really nice, fun way to finish it. Just want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to share your insights here. I think hopefully the goal here is to provide some inspirational, educational, entertaining content to just help just people further their careers, because I think, we can all identify with having been stuck at one point in time over a particular project or just a particular challenge. And so the goal, just by being here today and talking about these things openly, is hopefully we can make that difference in one person, maybe more than one person's life, and just make some content to feed the machine.
That's the important.
But that's the important. But thank you guys so much for participating,
Thank you.
and I'll meet you back here next year, right here. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks, guys.